Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Book Club of California's Southern California program titled Los Angeles Before the Freeways, Images of an Era, 1850 to 1950. And thank you all for joining us here at the historic Blinn House, run by Pasadena Heritage. Pasadena Heritage's historic Blinn House. My name is Kevin Kosick, and I'm the Executive Director of the Book Club of California. It's my pleasure to welcome you and host this program this evening. For those of you that might be new to the Book Club of California, we are a nonprofit, member and donor-supported organization that is dedicated to preserving and promoting the history of the book and the book arts. Oftentimes we do that with a focus on the literature and the history of California and the West. The book club publishes limited edition, finely made books. We have a scholarly journal and club newsletter, and we have keepsakes for our members. We host a year-round series of programs, just like this one, on topics including fine printing, design, typography, bookbinding, collecting, California history, and much, much more. Now, if you're not a member of the book club, or if your membership has lapsed, and you're interested in what we do, please consider joining or rejoining our century-long tradition. Our membership dues are modest, and the benefits are many, and we simply can't do the work of the book club without the support of our members, so I encourage you to pick up some of the literature on your table. Oh, I thought somebody was coming in. No, just waving to you, waving to our speaker. That's good too. Sorry to interrupt the speech there. Pick up some of the literature on your table about the book club, or visit us online at bccbooks.org, or talk to me after tonight's program. And now for tonight's program and our speaker. The program again is titled Los Angeles Before the Freeways, Images of an Era, 1850 to 1950. And our speaker is Nathan Marsak. Nathan Marsak is an author, a Los Angeles historian, and preservation advocate. Nathan studied under the renowned architectural critic Rainer Banham at the University of California, Santa Cruz, and completed his graduate work at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. He worked on the curatorial staff of the Los Angeles Museum of Contemporary Art and served as a historian for the Los Angeles Police Museum Archives. His books include Los Angeles Neon, Bunker Hill, Los Angeles, Bunker Noir, and Marsak's Guide to Bunker Hill. This guy knows Bunker Hill, right? His latest work is a revised edition of Arnold Hylen's Los Angeles Before the Freeways, 1850 to 1950. Now tonight, Nathan will share the story of a lost Los Angeles from an era before the freeways, a time when downtown Los Angeles was unmarred by wide-scale redevelopment and retained much of its original character. He'll be talking about Los Angeles before those freeways. That book was originally first published by Dawson's Bookshop in 1981 and featured stunning black and white photography from Arnold Hylen. Now, if you have questions for our speaker, please wait to the end of the presentation. We certainly will have time for some Q&A, and we'll do that at the end. And we'll also save some time for you to check out the book in the back and perhaps acquire a copy for your library and have it signed by the author and our speaker. So now, please welcome our speaker to the microphone, Nathan Marsak.
Yes? Go. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. Thank you for coming out to hear me go on and on and on about our lost 19th century built environment. Because Victorian architecture does not get the respect it deserves. That's not to say that people don't like it. On the contrary, people love it. You know, people go to Carroll Avenue and Angelino Heights, or go to the Heritage Square, our used car lot in old homes. And they will ooh and ah at the variegated shingle and the multiplicity of colors and the willful asymmetry of the silhouettes with all the finials and the chimneys and the gables and the whatnottery. But that doesn't mean that people take it very seriously. Because when my architecture buddies get together, who do they talk about? Schindler, Neutra. You never hear them talk about James Bradbeer. No one's ever talking about Frederick Rice Dorn. No. Because I think there's right, oof, what? I know, well, you'll be hearing about them tonight. Because I think it's true with the study of American history in general, but architectural history in particular, that there's that funny time with all those presidents, I can't remember the names of them, between Abraham Lincoln and like Teddy Roosevelt, that people get a bit, sniffy about. And if you like the moderns, you're never going to take that stuff seriously. And don't get me wrong, I love the moderns. Yes, I do. I mean, there's that wonderful, peculiarly California arc between Irving Gill and William Pereira, and in there you've got like Eichler and Cliff May and Walton Beckett and Lautner and Army and Davis and Wayne McAllister, all that good stuff. But they'll still get kind of sniffy about older stuff because it's revivalist. 20th century revivalist stuff, though, that stuff gets respect. I mean, people love, Johnson and Coate and George Washington Smith. But the 19th century stuff, nobody likes that stuff. So that's what we're here to talk about today, because I like that stuff. In that aforementioned funny time with all the presidents who can't remember the names of, who, by the way, were Johnson, Grant, Hayes, Garfield, Arthur, Cleveland, Harrison, Cleveland, and McKinley. Yeah! Those are the guys we're going to talk about. There's that sweet spot right there, the first Cleveland administration and Benjamin Harrison, and oh, that's some good stuff. Hello, sir.
Hi.
She's right over there.
Come on in.
So, I don't know, you just wind me up and I just go and start talking. Might as well start talking, the actual meat of our program tonight. First thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about the great Arnold Hylen, why and how he made the books he did, and then we'll talk about how I came to them, and then we'll talk a bit about the sort of styles of architecture that you would have seen if you were hand in hand with Hylen walking around downtown in the 1950s. Whoops, and I can't forget. There he goes. So, Arnold Hylen, born in 1908 in Sweden, comes to America, his family moves to America, moved to Vermont in like 1917, and they quickly realized that the only place on earth worse than Sweden is, Vermont. So, just because it's chilly, I love Vermont. I got family from there. But they did what every smart immigrant does, is they look to sunny Southern California and they say, that's where I'm going to go. And so they did. That's Arnold standing next to his father, the nine-fingered carpenter from Sweden. And they move out to LA, and Dad, the carpenter, is downtown, little Arno in tow. Gustav Arnold Hylen, but he goes by Arnold his whole life. And because his father was named Gustav, so you can't have two Gustav Hylens in the family. So little Arnold in tow, and he's looking up at these magnificent buildings that Dad is working on, and just enraptured by them, the wonder of these magnificent structures. And there he is, about 1930. So he's this young, artistic prodigy, sensitive boy. Gets into Srinaar when he was like 15. Drops out of high school. He's going to be a great painter, but I think he realized, he was never going to be one of the greats. He was never going to be a Millard Sheets or an Emil Koza. So, and the Depression happens, and some other things happen. So he's got to get into something that's going to pay the bills, and that is photography. So it's World War II. He's 4F. He's kept out of service because of his high myopia. He's extremely nearsighted, and taking up photography, he gets a job with the Fluor Corporation. The Fluor Corporation is an oil field services corporation, kind of like Halliburton, but without the armies. They did oil field service. They built refineries and pipelines and stuff like that. So Hylen is their in-house documentarian and graphic designer. If you go to a trade show and you need to, put big pictures of, refineries and you, up on a phone core, Hylen would do that. And here's something kind of unrelated, but related, which I just have to bring up because it just occurred to me. So he's working for a company that has that is of vital interest to the United States oil field services. He speaks like 6 languages. He's being flown all over the world in the 1950s. He's going to South America speaking Spanish, doing stuff. He's going to the Middle East because he speaks Arabic. Right? He was a spook. Definitely. Come on, for the agency? I don't know. If my Uncle Kemper was still alive, I could ask him, but he's gone. He took his secrets with him. So I don't have proof of that. I'm just going to throw that out there because I think it's interesting. But let's say it was true just for fun. But in any event, even if it's not, what he did when he wasn't out spying for the United States, I mean taking photographs of Florida Corporation, was on his Sundays, he would go from his little house in East LA and then go downtown and walk around, and he would look at all these amazing Victorian buildings and say, oh my God, it's all disappearing. I'm going to take photographs of it. I don't know why, I just have to, and that's why he's my spirit animal, because he loves to document amazing old downtown LA. So I have to point out how weird that was. As it was true for America in general, but certainly for Los Angeles to be, pathologically forward thinking. We had the aerospace industry here. We had innovations in fast food. I mean, everything that was new and cool and groovy and futuristic was Southern California. You woke up in the morning and you got in your giant tail-fin car and went down a gleaming new highway to a shopping center ringed by 65 acres of parking lot next to your ranch house and all that sort of stuff. But not that guy. You go to work in your office. This is, of course, Claude Beelman's 1955 Superior Oil Building, and it's super rational corporate modern, and then you're like, oh, let's go to lunch. And where would you go? Douglas Honnold's 1949 Tiny Nailers, with just a giant, wacky, sweeping UFO roof, and all the walls are glass. Am I inside? Am I outside? Oh my God, there's a giant neon sign. But not Arnold Hylen. No, you know what he's thinking? He's thinking, I like balustrades. I like leaning on fluted columns and things like that, which is, again, absolutely anachronistic for his time. And so God bless him for being the guy. Among the guys, there were a few guys who were walking around down there. One of them, by the way, here's an aside, was William Ray, who I believe the Book Club of California did a marvelous book of his pictures called A Long Walk Downtown. If you don't have it, make sure to get it after you buy mine. So plug for that. And, okay, flash forward to 1993. There's me. I'm living in Wisconsin, as was mentioned. Minding my own business, but I start doing architectural history. But I start reading Raymond Chandler, start reading James Elroy, Devil in a Blue Dress, Walter Mosley, great stuff. And I get the bug. And you know what it's like when you get the bug for like old LA. And I'm not an LA native myself, I grew up in Santa Barbara, but we would come down to LA when I was a kid. Of course, it was like a museum of madness down here. It was just, it's LA, it's nuts, we love it. So I'd always had sort of a fetish for it. And so I tell everybody, okay, I'm gonna leave, I'm gonna move to LA. This is like end of 93, and so people are telling me like, you're gonna go to LA and there's gonna be a giant earthquake, and you're gonna regret moving there. And I said, oh, come on. Well, that's prophetic. I'm sure it was my fault somehow. So anyway, so I'm living in LA, I'm living in like East Hollywood, going downtown all the time, hanging around the old Central Library, it's still there, hanging in the bars around Central Library, because I really wanted to, pick up librarians. And at which I was not terribly successful, but I was totally unsuccessful either. And I'd be with some old rummies, and they'd kind of point out the greasy window, and they'd say, up there, 30 years ago then, up on that hill that was all covered in mansions. And I go, no. They go, yeah. And out here, all the commercial downtown, all the office buildings were covered in turrets and gargoyles and things. And I said, no. They said, yeah, buy me a drink and I'll tell you some more. So I'm like, okay, so wave the guy over, another couple of scotch and waters. And one of the old stew bums says to me, and there was a guy, and he took photos of all this stuff, and he put out books of it. And I was like, well, that's amazing. I'll go down to my, Barnes & Noble and go buy copies. And they said, no, kid, sorry, no. They printed like a couple hundred copies of these things, all snapped up by collectors. You're never gonna find them. You can try and go, there used to be like a bookseller's row down around like 6 grand and 7. Good luck. So, I start hunting for these mysterious books, and finally, I find them. And I remember this like it was yesterday, calling up the landlord and saying, so I've got great news, I won't be paying my rent this month. And they're like, that's great news, how? And I'm like, because I got these amazing books, look at them. And they were not happy, but these are them. So it was part of Dawson's, it's called Los Angeles Miscellaneous Series, a series of 16, and Hylen's Bunker Hill, Los Angeles landmark, 1976, 500 copies. Dawson's books, printed by Grant Dahlstrom, Pasadena fame, I'm sure you all know. And of course, Hylen's 1981 Los Angeles Before the Freeways, because Hylen was a bibliophile, apart from being a painter and a photographer. He collected books, and his best friend was Glenn Dawson, of Dawson's book fame. And Glenn said to him, you know, Arno, you got all these pictures, you know all this stuff about OLA, let me put out some books for you. So they did, and here they are. And I bought them, and I would drive around with them like a sort of a weird phantom Thomas guide, like on my lap, like driving my old beat up old Packard and flipping through the books. And I said to myself, you know what, I'm gonna make it my mission to reprint these things because they need to be in the hands of hungry, fetishistic collectors like myself, and I shall make it happen. And you know, we'll see what happens. 25 years it takes me to, first I gotta find the family, and there's none of them left. He had no issue. He had a sister who had a daughter, so it's his like great grandniece. And I love her very much. But it took, so after I find her in 2005, I'm talking with her for like 10 solid years, trying to wheedle this stuff out of her, because she's got big plans for it. And it's like, God bless you, but no. 2016, I got a whole box full of this stuff, amazing stuff. I mean, all of his handwritten note, everything like that. And I say, okay, I want the negatives, I want the stuff, I want the rights for the Bunker Hill book and the Freeways book. So, oh, right, so here's how it came. So you see, it's like from the desk of Arnold Hylen. This is great stuff. This is how all of his negatives were folded in these pieces of paper. After I took that picture, I realized I needed to show, oh wait, I'm not actually keeping it like that. I should show you that I have actually put everything in Mylar sleeves, in clamshell binders, which are in my office, which is kept at exactly 68 degrees year-round at 44% humidity. And the first thing I said I needed to do was put out his Bunker Hill book, and that's when the aforementioned very lovely niece said, oh, well, the Bunker Hill stuff, no, I think we threw that out. Yeah. And I was like, what was it? It's like I think a burglar came in and stole it. And it's like, yes, a burglar came in to steal the Bunker Hill archive. Which would be me, but I didn't do it. But it was actually, oh, and that's Pumpkin Patch. She's evil, but I love her. And in a weird way, I hate to say it, but it was kind of a blessing in disguise, because I was going to republish Hylen's Bunker Hill book, which is great, but it's all, it's like 100 images, but they're all black and white, and they're all shot in a very narrow frame between 50 and 68. And so not being able to do that, I then threw everything into my Bunker Hill book for Angel City Press, published in September 2020. I could not be more proud of it. I thank Angel City Press so much for that. That guy right there, he's ACP. And yay! And I love it. That was like years and years of work. It's incredible. And then I said, well, that's done. Now what? Let me turn my attention to the Freeways book, which I did have. That I got. And I love the Freeways book. It's a total work of art. Dahlstrom's a genius, but it's not exact. My initial impulse was like a facsimile, like a reproduction copy. But the issue with that is the way that they did it is it's all the text in the front and the pictures in the back, and so you're reading, and then it says like 22, and flip, you look at the picture and you go, okay, flip back. So the first thing Terry Akamatsu of Angel City Press said was like, we're not doing that. We're gonna integrate everything, but we're gonna make it bigger, brighter, better, and again, I could not be more proud. I think it's a really incredible book, of which I'm merely a sliver of, because of course it's Arnold Hylen's book, and it was so beautifully designed by J. Eric Linksweiler at Angel City Press. So I'm real happy about it. And then we can now talk about some of the things you'll see if you have a copy of it. Mr. Counter has one, I think.
Yes.
What you're looking at?
Downey Block, Grand Central Hotel, and Pico Building.
And the Pico building still is. No, that's if it's near the Downey blocks, it's the second Pico building, not the Pico Hotel.
Pico apostrophe S.
Pico's building. So he's walking around downtown. Now you've all gone to Adobe's. You've seen Adobe's. You go to Old Vera Street and there's the Avila Adobe. You're in the Valley. You see the Leonis Adobe. But those are house museums. In Hylen's day, when you're walking around with him, you'd just be walking down the street. It's like, oh, there's an Adobe. There's a Mexican era Adobe. There's a Spanish era Adobe. For example, that was the Talamantes Adobe, built about 1835. That was on Broadway, just north of Sunset, which is now Cesar Chavez, but right there, just sort of northwest of the Civic Center, and used in its original, incarnation as just a place for people to live. And there was a huge fight. Native Sons of the Golden West, all through 1956, fought to save this. And of course, the developer was like, no, you know what we need? Parking lot. So that became a parking lot. The Lugo Adobe, probably some of you know, that was a pretty famous one. First two-story building in Los Angeles, right on the plaza. But it was just close enough to Union Station. It became part of the greater sort of Union Station development plan. They were like, well, that's where we're going to put the park. So that was up until recently with the Father Junipero Serra Park, until of course they came and tore down Father Serra's statue, and it is now Los Angeles' finest open-air toilet and drug den. So, hooray for progress! And thank God we tore down the Lugo Adobe, also 1830s, and incredibly important. And so, by the way, yeah, we're going to sort of go through this roughly chronologically, but not exactly. I'm just letting you know, in case you're wondering how I structured this. The Italianate, which you see very little of any longer, except for perhaps the aforementioned Pico House. Just incredibly important. We had a lot of revivalist architecture, a lot of Greek revival up until about the 1840s, until there were cats like Andrew Jackson Downing, Alexander Jackson Davis, and they promulgated the idea being that Americans should live in either Gothic revival or Italianate, in these wonderful little Italian villas. Like commercial buildings should look like Renaissance palazzi, and Italian villas surrounded by gardens. That would be very lovely for everyone, and it would uplift morally and spiritually the people of the United States, and it did. Hooray for us. There was, of course, the Panic of '37, so there was a downturn, so commissions died off after that, but then there was a fellow named Calvert Vaux who made the Italianate sort of common currency and common courtesy all across America. These are sort of late for Italianate in general, but early for early structures in Los Angeles. And that, of course, is the old Ducommun block by commissioned by Charles Louis Ducommun, who was Ezra Kaiser, who designed it in 1872. That was at the corner of Main and Commercial. And then down there, a little further down Main, is the Phillips block by Burgess John Reeve for Louis Phillips, and 1874, 1882. And you can see the sort of wonderful heavy cornice with the big, these are hallmarks of the Italianate, the big brackets, the keystone arch over those like long hooded windows with coins and solemnity, dignity, bilateral symmetry, incredible stuff. All of it gone. I'd say if you really needed to see an Italianate building, the best remaining expression besides the Pico House would be at Heritage Square. The one, the Perry House. God, it's such a good building. But this is the sort of thing that you would have seen. And you would have seen Romanesque revival. Los Angeles was one of the great Romanesque, and Richardson Romanesque cities in the world. Basically all of it gone now. When I say Romanesque revival, what was it reviving? Well, the Romanesque was sort of a medieval style in between. You've got the Carolingian over here, and the Gothic and the High Gothic over there, and then right here, like 11th, 10th century stuff. That's the Romanesque, known for their sort of squat massing and the rough-hewn surfaces and the round arches. So flash forward 1,000 years and change. It's the 1840s, and LA is filling, not LA, but America is filling up with Germans, and to whom we owe basically, everything, because our system of education is German. Everything we know about agriculture is German. America was brought into a technological future via the unique genius of German engineering. But what we really owe the Germans is the Rundbogenstil. Yes, the round arch style, because they brought this Romanesque revival style with them. And there was one kid who just loved it, made it his own, a little Franco-English kid in New Orleans. I know what you're gonna say, he's from Boston. No, he's from New Orleans. Henry Hobson Richardson. And you see a lot of, okay. If you're ever on any old Los Angeles site, like on Facebook, the first thing you're gonna see every single time is that big red sandstone courthouse, Curlit, Eisenman, Cuthbertson, 1891, which was, so not all Romanesque revival is Richardsonian Romanesque, but all Richardsonian Romanesque is Romanesque revival, and of course the Richardsonian Romanesque courthouse that we had was a total ripoff of Richardson's Allegheny courthouse. Anyway, so you see this sort of thing become de rigueur, especially in the early 90s. That's the, no, not Montgomery, it's the McClintock block. 1892, designed by Morgan and Walls, and it's not, full bore Romanesque revival, but you can definitely see there's some of that rough-hewn Lordsburg sandstone, some of these wonderful rounded arches. And then up there, in that corner, in the right-hand corner, is Thomas Douglas Stimson wanted to put up a big skyscraper office block, tallest building in Los Angeles at the time, first 6-story building, and he did it with these sort of wonderful rounded arches and the squat piers, and then you can't really see it on that south facade. There are these very deep balconies, and this one's called the Willard Block, and that was done by Willard Stimson, and he couldn't call it the Stimson Block because his dad had already done the Stimson Block. He's like, Dad, I'm gonna call it the Stimson Block, and Dad says, no, sorry, Willard, you're gonna have to call it something else. He calls it the Willard Block. Those are both by Carroll Herkimer Brown, and if you know the one great remaining Richardsonian Romanesque structure left in Los Angeles, I know you all do, Carroll Herkimer Brown, built for Thomas Douglas Stimson. It's the big house down at, I want to say like Figueroa and 24th, that's the Stimson house, which I think now is a nunnery, but it's incredible. And if you haven't seen it, in the flesh, go check it out. It's probably our greatest house in Los Angeles, besides the Flint house, of course. The big window style. I know a lot of people will look at this and say, like, wasn't that like Queen Anne? Like, no, don't do that. Often, sometimes I call it that or the San Francisco style, because there was a very famous structure in San Francisco from 1875 called the Palace Hotel by a guy named Gaynor, John P. Gaynor. And it had like 700 box bay windows outside of it. San Francisco, of course, foggy city, they don't need big porches to sit on them, you'll freeze to death. What you need is light, so they were very big on their bay windows. And after the Palace Hotel, for example, Robert Brown Young's Westminster Hotel, this was at 4th and Main, and just incredible. Still these box bays here, canted bays there, and Robert Brown Young, this guy was just a nut. I love him so much. 1888 is really late to be doing mansard. I mean, I get it. It's very 70s. Everyone is like, well, let's express the sort of progressive ideals of Napoleon III. Definitely over by 1880, but here he is with these sort of like mansardic towers, wonderful stuff, very Second Empire with the lacy frilly stuff on top. And this lasted all the way to like 1960. I mean, God, nothing's left of it. Adolph Charles Lookins down there in the corner of the Amstoid block, that was on the corner of Main and Market Street. And this is just sort of the wonderful, wonderful world of downtown Los Angeles once upon a time. There was one great, Ira Yellen tore it down in 88. There's one great remaining, there were 2 great remaining bay windowed structures right on Hill Street, 300 block of Hill Street. And now there's nothing left. There's nothing. Now, when you think of Victorian structures, 9 times out of 10, most people are thinking of Queen Anne residential, right? Everybody does, like the Munsters house. Up here, that's again Robert Brown Young again, a little earlier, 1882. East Lake is sort of a progenitor to the Queen Anne, and there's the man himself. Arnold Hylen loved to take self-portraits. So he was like, doing selfies, but he had his Rolleiflex on a timer from across the street. And Queen Anne's are just, all of Bunker Hill was covered in Queen Anne's, that's why we know them all so well. And in summer, that's the Melrose Hotel, it was at 120 South Grand. That's now where the new grand, it's like that Geary thing that's across from the other Geary thing, the one that looks like this, this one that looks like that. Yeah, that's right there. And So whence came Queen Anne? Basically, in 1876, there was the Philadelphia Centennial Fair, and there was a guy named Richard Norman Shaw who had the England Pavilion buildings done in sort of a Jacobean, Elizabethan style. And it, huge hit. Lines around the block. Everybody loved it so much that it began to inform this sort of revivalist thing where it was a unique to it was seen as sort of the first American style. It was not, when people say, well, is that how they built in Queen Anne? No, actually Queen Anne is when they had sort of a late Baroque. But Queen Anne is considered the reign in England, which was like the last gasp of pre-industrial England. So that's why they're sort of saying, like, look at all this amazing stuff with it's almost like the arts and craftsmen, it harkens back to handwork, which is ironic because the Queen Anne houses are incredibly, as revivalist as they are, they're incredibly modern. We always have to remember them as being super modern houses because of the machine-made nails. All that wood is cut by machine. Balloon frame structures. Up on Bunker Hill, it was one of the first places where LA had like an entire sewer systems. All these had, that new ventilated ceramic flush toilet. People lived, I'm going off, but people lived better up on Bunker Hill in the 1870s than kings had lived. Middle-class people, lower middle-class people in LA lived better than kings had lived for 10,000 years. So, and that was LA. We were at the forefront. Now, well, what happened to Queen? Well, let's talk about the Beaux-Arts for a second. And why do we call it the Beaux-Arts? Because architects used to, I think Richard Morris Hunt was the first to actually go to the École des Beaux-Arts, and he came back, and as we began to be trained at the Beaux-Arts, it gave it its name, and then Hunt influences McKim, and White, and then once all of the Newport Cottage, Gilded Age people started building in the Beaux-Arts, it was naturally the appropriate style for the United States. But especially here in Los Angeles, it was kind of a perfect storm because not only was there the big boom of 1888, when, remember that? And there was like, oh, you can get a train ticket out from Kansas for $1, and everything like that. Big boom in 88. But of course, then the banks tightened all their lending, and there was a bust. So we start going in the toilet right in there, and then just as we're dragging our way out, 1893, huge crash, and building stops. But that same time, the big Columbian Exposition of 1893, the White City, Daniel Burnham of Burnham and Root designs that as this wonderful giant Beaux-Arts fantasy land it's like Greco-Roman, but it has sort of a French air to it. And so by the time we did ourselves out of the bust here and the greater American crash of 93, it's like 1902, 3, 4, and our entire visual idea of how things should look has completely changed. Bless you.
Thank you.
And, and I should mention, because I was talking about doing selfies earlier, who were the, viral influencers of the day? Who were busy doing, selfies with duck face and stuff like that all day long. That was Wharton, Elsie DeWolf, who was our first interior designer. Wharton, of course, would dictate what was in good taste. And the most important man in the history of the universe, Edward Bok. Edward Bok was the director and president and managing editor of Ladies' Home Journal. And that was back when Ladies' Home Journal, produced house plans and stuff like that. And Bok was pathologically obsessed with how much he hated Queen Anne. And he called it, repellently ornate. and it was, Queen Anne houses were akin to circus wagons. And there's nothing more low than a circus wagon. And so he kept saying, this is the appropriate style for building, and we took it to heart. And that's why all over Bunker Hill, the large apartment buildings from like 1904, 5, 6 are all just like this. This is just off Bunker Hill. This is the Burmar at 516 South Figueroa, which is now where the Arco Plaza is. And you see this wonderful, this solidity and symmetry, bilateral symmetry, big Greek tympanum over the fluted Corinthian columns, but a little, fancified aspect that you would find more in the Beaux-Arts. There's this wonderful entablature of Rinceau. There's a swag of cartouche in the tympanum. Just wonderful stuff. That's William Enders designed that in 1903. And then down there, now some of you might actually remember this building because we didn't lose that until 1975, which is the old Hudson and Munsell Hall of Records just across from City Hall. which has that classic, base, shaft, capital Beaux-Arts construction of forms, and these wonderful, and it's all covered in white glazed brick, and these Flemish chateau-esque dormers, which just kill me. Oh my God, they're so wonderful. What are you gonna do? They had to tear it down because it was off kilter and it made everyone crazy. So it's like, tear it down. Oh, right, and you'd also be seeing, speaking of revivalist forms, you'd also be seeing a lot of mission revival. Speaking of the 1893 fair again, the A-Page Brown designed California State Building, which was like a kind of a twin tower job, kind of like if you know Mission Santa Barbara, it's kind of based on that. Again, huge hit, very influential, and the Texas State Building was too, to a lesser extent, but really the California State Building. And what's really interesting here is we start building in mission revival here as an appropriate response to our climate and the fact that we are where the style of architecture comes from the Franciscan friars, the priests who came here, and they had very limited workforce, very limited materials, and then they had to marry that with their limited idea about architecture, which came from Spain via Mexico City, this sort of like late Renaissance. So it all gets melanged together, and you have all these wonderful like expanses of unadorned plaster and red tile roofs and long arcades and the scallop parapet, which again, and I could go on all night about mission revival, but with the publication of Ramona, etc. I know you know your stuff. It is decided that this is the appropriate way to build. So this was on Bunker Hill, the corner of 2nd and Olive, designed by the great Arthur Leonard Haley. And then down there, that was James Lee Burton's Owens Apartments, which was 1 block down, which is less of, that's not actually done in plaster, that's all done in just wood, but with these wonderful scallop parapets. So there are levels of missioning to be had. And of course, it didn't last terribly long. People then said, well, no, maybe the Pueblo style is more appropriate, and then it's supplanted by the Spanish colonial revival, and it dies out. But this is something that, again, the first architectural style to start here and move east, which is why, like, you go to Kansas City or somewhere, you'll see a train station in Mission. Like, this started here instead of something starting out there and coming this way. This is Los Angeles starting to send itself out into the world. And I think, and I think that's about it. If you like, pick up Bunker Hill, Los Angeles. It's not bad. During the production of Bunker Hill, Los Angeles, my editor said, Nathan, what's with all the crime and murder and horrible stuff? I'm like, that's great stuff. She says, you take that and you do your own thing with it. So I did a little book called Bunker Noir, which is just true crime on Bunker Hill. The aforementioned Marsak's Guide, which I named after eponymously named, like, Baedeker or Frommer's or Fodor's. Those are all Marsak's Guide to Bunker Hill, which is the guide to everything that's on Bunker Hill. And then finally, Los Angeles Before the Freeways, which bunkerhilllosangeles.com is where I write my blog. If you're really interested in my getting stupidly deep dives into the minutiae of Bunker Hill, like I'll look at the corner of one little postcard and go off about it for 8,000 words. Hit my blog, and that's about it. Thank you very much. Do you have time for questions? Sorry? Q&A, yeah, absolutely. Any questions?
How much do you love Bunker Hill?
Oh,
That first obvious question.
I don't honestly really care. I'm really.
It's not your thing. You're not gonna
No, Manchester United. That's all I care about. Yes, sir.
Did the military have a bunker up there?
Excellent question. So, it's 1875. Prudent Beaudry has decided that he's going to develop the area, and you've got Charity Street, which becomes Grand. You've got like Chapules down there, which is Figueroa, and then the very spine of it, he decides to christen Bunker Hill Avenue. In 1875 was the 100th anniversary of the Battle of Bunker Hill. That being said, if you take Bunker Hill Avenue all the way out towards Fort Moore, there were bunkers there, which had been built by the Mormon Battalion for the War of 46, 7, 8. I think they were actually the first flag hoisting, July 4th, 1847, was done at those bunkers on Fort Moore Hill, at Fort Moore, named after the famous Mormon who was killed at the Battle of San Pasqual. Ergo, there are two ways of thinking about it. It's either he named it for the 100th anniversary, or he named it because there were bunkers down the street. But we don't actually have Beaudry here to say, no, it's called Bunker Hill. And it wasn't actually called Bunker Hill for the longest time. The name of the street along the spine, Bunker Hill Avenue, sort of lent itself to the area in general. Originally, it was just, you would read in the papers about like the Hill people. And the Hill people are like, Olive Heights, there's funny little areas, or, Beaudry land, basically they call it, are doing this, that, and the other thing. Mrs. Johnson from the, United Daughters of the Confederacy is visiting Mr. Smith over in, on Beaudry's territory. And it didn't really start getting called Bunker Hill in general until about 1895. But yes, so there were bunkers, but whether they were named for the bunkers, we'll never really know.
Other questions? Sure, right in front.
When did Bunker Hill cease to exist?
It never did cease to exist, although it doesn't look anything like it used to. We still have Bunker Hill. But I think what you're asking is, so in I'll try and do this in under 2 minutes, but in 1945, we had Roosevelt had the New Deal, but Truman had the Fair Deal, which no one remembers. And from there came the Community Redevelopment Agency's integration with the Title IX of the 1949 Housing Act. And that's when they decided Bunker Hill is redevelopment area number 1. And it didn't happen overnight. A bunch of other things, weird things happened to Bunker Hill, like the 4th Street cut, and they put in the freeway. It was before the freeways. They put in the freeway and they sliced 4th Street right through it. So Bunker Hill started getting sort of chopped up piecemeal over the, in the post-war era. 1959, like 10 years into it, the city council finally passes the redevelopment plan, and it takes another 2 years because it's the city. And in September of 1961, the Community Redevelopment Agency, with their CRA brand backhoes, start tearing down the first of the buildings, and that goes all the way through the 60s. I would say the end of Bunker Hill, the real end of Bunker Hill, is 1969, because two very important things happened. Number one of the last great pieces of Bunker Hill was Angel's Flight. That was crated up and moved off site and didn't return again until 1996, but at least fortunately we have that. And also, there were two houses that the Cultural Heritage Board, Cultural Heritage Commission, decided were worthy of saving. Those were the Salt Bucks and the Castle. And they were up there on Bunker Hill Avenue, 325 and 339. And they were put up on blocks, and they were taken over to Heritage Square. And the city, in their infinite wisdom, couldn't figure out how to put a fence around them, couldn't figure out how to have anyone guard them. And this is right between Manson and Altamont. So right in that sweet spot of just everything's bad. And it's October of '69, and vandals are in there. Some people will say this because homeless people were sleeping there and lighting fires because it was October, it just got cold. But I was talking to a guy who was a photographer, and he was saying, no, he was there the next day, and it smelled so heavily of gasoline and kerosene, whatever, that it was definitely arson, whichever. That to me is the end of Bunker Hill, is because Angel's Flight gets taken out, and the two last houses burned to the ground by some, Manson family rejects. I don't know. And then they were saying, when they started tearing down stuff in 1961, they're like, Bunker Hill will be rebuilt by 1970. Well, as we speak, the last empty parcel is now being developed. It is actually that's not entirely true, but the Colburn School expansion at 2nd and Hill Street is being built right now. So they're still figuring it out, 50 years in, 60 years into it. And of course, right next to Angel's Flight, where Angel's Flight was put in, at 4th and Hill, there's that Angel's Knoll development, which was going to be the tallest tower between Chicago and Hong Kong. But that got all bound up in that whole Huizar, in old cartoons, you have those comical bags with just a big dollar sign on them. That's Huizar for you. Anyway, so that will probably never get developed. And God willing, it will become a park, which is what it is now.
Yes.
It's the park from 500 Days of Summer, and it's just a wonderful park. But the city, in its infinite wisdom, could never figure out how to pick up, needles and poo. So one of these days we'll figure that out. I mean, we can go to the moon. We can't figure out how to have a park, but that would be a great park. And then Bunker Hill will be done. The big boat. Yes, there was a, yes, miss.
So, for instance, before the freeways,
Mhm.
what would you say would be the main thoroughfares, and did the red car go around that area? Is that?
Less the red car than the yellow car. There was the Larry, the Los Angeles Electric Railway, something. Yeah, that's right. Anyway, what was the first part? What were the main thoroughfares?
Yeah.
On Bunker Hill or around Bunker Hill?
Around there, like what would have gotten you to that neighborhood?
Well, interestingly, what they most, well, this is such a question. I mean, they were all good thoroughfares. There was Sunset, there was Figueroa, there was Hill Street, and Broadway and stuff like that. But one of the things was that Bunker Hill was seen as an impediment to heading west. So that's where the tunnels came in. And there were tunnels that went up Broadway, up to Sunset, and up Hill Street, up to Temple Street. Those are all gone. Even the hills they were in are completely gone. But we do still have the tunnels. And there was a subway that ran from Hill Street out to Glendale-ish. And that would be great to put back, but when they put in the Bonaventure, they sunk caissons right into the middle of it, so that's over. But we still have the 1st and 2nd Street tunnels. Those were major thoroughfares. 1st Street got a cut in 1917, so you could go through there, and of course, the freeway cut from the harbor on 4th Street. But mostly before the freeway, so to speak, it was kind of a pain to go around, and it's still a pain down there. Have you driven in downtown lately with those one-way streets? And now they took away half the lanes for, dancing and, well, I don't even know what, but, does that answer your question? I mean, I could.
Yeah, no, it's hard to picture.
Oh, yeah, I mean.
That area, how you'd access it and get out, in and out of it.
You could. It's just like, it's terrible. Anything else? Yes, ma'am.
What is the status of the Pico house now?
Oh, what is the status of the Pico House? There are probably people here who could speak to it better than I. I mean, I know you must know what's going on with the Teatro Mercedes, but.
It's occasionally used for exhibitions on the ground floor, but like the adjacent Merced Theater, it's largely vacant
Yeah.
and owned by the city.
It's owned by the city, which means they don't really have to. At one point, I know it was going to be like the Nike Pico House, and they were going to put the big Nike up there and stuff like that. But they couldn't reach an agreement. I mean, wouldn't that? And they do filming there, stuff like that. And I guess the old Masonic Hall, incredibly important, 1858, has been gutted to become a television studio, but they were talking about that like 20 years ago.
They were talking about the Merced as a television studio 20 years ago, and that never happened.
So basically, if you called the city tomorrow and said, I want the Pico House for one of these meetups, although it wouldn't make a lot of sense not being in Pasadena, but you see my point. They would charge you like $50,000 and you could have it for a night. Wouldn't it make the most amazing museum of Los Angeles known to man? It'd be incredible. But it's big, yeah, but it's sitting there laying fallow. I mean, the Garnier block across the street, that's the Chinese American Museum, and it's terrific. That is a great adaptive reuse. But the poor Pico House just languishes.
We'll take one more question. Candace, did you have a question?
Yeah, well, I was just wondering, did the red car, because they went all the way, through Pasadena and San Marino.
Yeah.
Did they make an appearance down there at all? Because apparently my mom took them to the beach.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I mean,
Did they go through there?
I'm not a trolley guy, because when you become a trolley guy, that's all you think about 24/7, and you're completely insane. I'm insane about other things. So I know a little bit about it. I can't speak authoritatively, but as I understand it, the famous red cars, their whole raison d'etre was to go all to the outer lying areas, because, was it Huntington was like, well, I just bought 300 acres out here,
Right.
We'll put a trolley out there. It was never intended to make a nickel. The idea was you get people out there and they'll buy your lots, and that's where you make your money. But I think it was the yellow cars, which were the ones that were actually, so the red cars died a natural death. Everyone thinks that there was that big conspiracy. Didn't happen. But the yellow cars were actually bought by, totally didn't happen. Anyway, I'll write about that someday. But the yellow cars were more downtown. And that's really what you see pictures of when you're looking at old slides of downtown.
So
Like
the
Broadway.
red car totally bypassed downtown?
No,
Well,
No,
that's what I'm asking.
but it wasn't as important.
They went into the subway terminal building on Hill Street.
Uh-huh.
You know, any of the cars coming in from Glendale or Hollywood,
And on the way out to the beach. Is that the way they went? 'Cause
I
you-
guess.
Yeah.
I'm not a trolley guy. But if you were going out
My family was.
you went to
Everybody did
the
here.
Pacific Electric building on on Main Street at Sixth.
Right, like Sixth and Main.
And all the cars went out on a big viaduct east of that building.
Mhm.
That was Pacific Electric, but
So in downtown, it was all yellow cars.
it was yellow cars downtown, but yeah, but the red cars, as both the subway and to go to outlying areas, were stationed at the fabulous subway terminal building by Schultz and Weaver.
Well, he just told me what it was. They went down, you tell him.
Well, it went down Santa Monica Boulevard,
Santa Monica
went down to the
Boulevard.
beach, and had a turnaround, table.
Yeah,
And turn around
I've got
and go
postcards
back
of
to
that.
So that's the way this area went to the beach.
Red car, Pasadena,
Yeah.
downtown, through the subway terminal, and then out Santa Monica Boulevard to the beach.
It sounds like we need a program on trolley cars, so if there's a
All
trolley.
right, I'm gonna become a trolley guy, have me back in a year, and I will do it all, I'll tell you.
Trolley expert, yeah, one more question and then we'll wrap up, back there.
I'm not a trolley guy. Do you have more in Bunker Hill?
Well, I told ACP that the book was going to be, have you seen the Muhammad Ali book that like Tashin put out? And it's like 6,000 pounds, and it's like, it was $8,000, and it's, you know, that big. I told them it was gonna be that size. And they said, that's adorable, dear. You're gonna have a normal book. So yeah, I've got not a small Bunker Hill archive, and you know, I've told my lovely wife, make sure if I get hit by a bus tomorrow, don't put it out on the curb. You know, so someone's gonna want. I know. But so I'm looking at, because I have so much stuff, I'm thinking of a series of, because I like to self-publish books like the Bunker Noir and the Marsak guy, of a series of like maybe a dozen books, limited, you know, 100 copies each signed, of like just my slides. Like I'd start with just downtown, but also like LA at night, which is a specialty of mine because I like old signage. But also one just about Pershing Square, because I have a ton of Pershing Square stuff. But I got so much weird Bunker Hill stuff that like just pictures of old guys walking down the street in 1952 that I couldn't just fit in anywhere in the book. So it's all got to get seen. Otherwise, it's just gonna, you know, who knows where. Yeah.
Elizabeth, okay, we'll do one more.
Did you know Leo Politi?
Oh, excellent question. Did I know Leo Politi? I did not, but if you're interested in Leo Politi, with whom I am sure you are all familiar, he did wonderful paintings. Leo Politi, he was a watercolor. Did you know that if you go to the Central Library, 5th and Hope, tomorrow, you can go see the world's most amazing exhibition of Leo Politi's original paintings, the ones that were used in his 1964 book, Bunker Hill, Los Angeles.
Did you know that there's a little Italian museum by Alvera Street?
Yeah.
With lots of Leo Politi stuff?
Yeah, the Italian American Museum is incredible. There's
It's just a little one.
a picture of that in the book. But I never knew Politi himself, although if you're interested in Politi, I very much recommend there's a tour company called Esotouric. It was started by my friends Kim and Richard, and they have a Politi tour, and I think the next Politi tour, which I'll be on, is the 19th, and we'll go see the stuff and talk about Politi, and I recommend it. So if anyone doesn't know Politi, he did wonderful, super charming, he was famous for his children's books, so he did wonderful children's books about like, you know, Mexican kids on Olvera Street in the 50s, and they're just amazing. But he was obsessed with, and he had grown up on Bunker Hill, well, in part, I mean, never mind. I won't even go into the stuff about Colorado, but he comes out here and he paints where he lived. He lived mostly on Fort Moore Hill over by this old cemetery. And in 1964, Desert Southwest Publications publishes this great book. It's very easy to find on eBay, called Bunker Hill, Los Angeles. Incredible, wonderful reproductions of his paintings. And what's interesting about Politi is if you ever went to one of his book signings in the 60s, the line would be a mile long because he took forever. Some of you who have the book know this, because right? And he would paint these wonderful water. Every time he signed a book, like when I signed a book, you know, scribble, scribble, you know, best wishes, Nathan Marsak. But he would paint this wonderful watercolors in the front of all of his books, and so you can find those on eBay all the time. And maybe I need to start doing that, although I think we'll be here until 61.
Well, let's get started.
I know.
Let's get started.
Give me my oils.
With that, we're gonna wrap up with
What's
questions.
the Pelini tour? How did you get on this Pelini tour?
Oh, well, they're called esoteric, and if you Google them, it'll come up. And they do tours. I mean, I'm not here to shill for a tour company, but wonderful tours. They do literary tours like Fonte and Politi and Chandler and Kane, and they have architectural tours, and they have a lot of crime tours. They have a Black Dahlia tour, that's probably their signature tour. So, and they're a lot of fun. And Kim and Richard are characters. So,
Let's give a big round of applause for.
thank you very much, everyone.
And if you're interested in getting the book, it is in the back. Elliot will hook you up. He's got books for sale in the back. Nathan's going to be back there signing them.
Yes, I am.
Run back there while I wrap up here. Get your water, got your phone, whatever you need. Thanks everyone again. One more round of applause for Nathan Marsak. And thank you for joining us here and attending this Book Club of California presentation. We'll be back again in a month for another program titled Unnatural Habitat, the Native and Exotic Wildlife of Los Angeles. And our speaker is biologist and professor of anthropology and biological sciences at the University of Southern California here in Los Angeles, Craig Stanford. So it's in your calendar. You take the calendar from your table. Please join us here next month. Thank you all for coming.